The courthouse doors swung open with such force that dust exploded from the hinges, and Quinn Xavier stood there like a ghost returned from the grave, his trail-worn boots planted firm on the polished floor, while every eye in Council Bluffs turned to witness what would come next. Judge Morrison's gavel had been halfway to the wood when Quinn appeared, and beside the cowboy stood a woman who looked as weathered by travel as he did, her brown hair pinned back in a simple bun, her gray traveling dress dusty from the road, her green eyes burning with the kind of intensity that made even the corrupt land agent Silas Whitmore shift uncomfortably in his tailored suit. "This proceeding is closed," Judge Morrison said, recovering his composure though his knuckles had gone white around his gavel. "Not until you hear what we have to say." Quinn's voice carried across the room with the kind of authority that came from a man who had stared down death and lived to tell about it. "I have proof that the claim filed against my property is fraudulent, and I have a witness who can testify to the whole scheme." The woman beside him stepped forward, and Quinn felt something shift in his chest the way it had been shifting for the past 800 miles they had traveled together. Ophelia Owens had the kind of courage most men only pretended to possess, and watching her stand before this room full of hostile faces made him want to pull her close and shield her from what was coming, even though he knew she would never forgive him for treating her like she needed protection. "Who is this woman?" Whitmore demanded, his face flushing red beneath his carefully groomed mustache. "This is highly irregular." "Her name is Ophelia Owens, and she worked as a clerk in the land office in Omaha, Nebraska, where you filed your falsified documents." Quinn pulled a leather folder from inside his coat. "She has copies of the real documents, and she is prepared to testify that you bribed officials to backdate claims and forge signatures while I was delivering horses to Fort Laramie last spring." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Whitmore shot to his feet, his lawyer beside him gesturing wildly. The handful of townspeople who had come to watch what they thought would be the final transfer of the Xavier Ranch to Whitmore's land company now pressed forward, eager to hear every word. Judge Morrison hammered his gavel repeatedly, calling for order, but his eyes kept darting to Ophelia with something that looked like fear. Quinn had left Council Bluffs, Iowa, in March of 1876 with a string of 20 horses that the Army had contracted him to deliver. The journey was supposed to take 6 weeks, but a late spring blizzard had trapped him and his hired hands in the mountains for nearly a month. By the time he had completed the delivery and made his way back through Nebraska territory in early June, his money pouch heavy with payment, he had stopped in Omaha to purchase supplies and pay the taxes on his land. That was where he had met Ophelia Owens. She had been working behind the counter at the land office, and when Quinn had asked to confirm his tax payments had been recorded properly, something in her expression had made him pause. She had glanced around nervously, before leaning forward and whispering that he should check his property records carefully, because there had been irregularities in the office recently. Quinn had pressed her for details, and Ophelia had reluctantly admitted that she had seen documents being altered, dates being changed, and signatures being forged. She had kept her own copies because she knew something was wrong, but she was terrified to speak up because the men involved had money and power, and she was just a clerk trying to make enough to support herself and her aging mother. When Quinn had returned to Council Bluffs 2 days later, he had found Silas Whitmore already living in his ranch house, claiming that Quinn had sold him the property before leaving for Fort Laramie. The documents looked official, complete with what appeared to be Quinn's signature, dated in February before his departure. Quinn had immediately protested, but Whitmore had the backing of Judge Morrison and half the town council. men who stood to profit from the land development scheme Whitmore had planned. Quinn had been run out of his own town, threatened with arrest if he did not leave peacefully, and told that if he wanted to contest the claim, he would need proof that the documents were forged. So Quinn had ridden back to Omaha, and he had found Ophelia Owens packing up her small room above the general store, preparing to flee, because she had been discovered copying documents and was afraid of what might happen to her. "Come with me," Quinn had said, standing in her doorway while she clutched a carpet bag to her chest. "Come with me and testify. I will protect you, and we will both get justice." Ophelia had looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see right through to his soul. "Why should I trust you? I do not even know you." "Because we are both fighting the same evil men," Quinn had replied. "And because if we do not stand together, they will win." She had agreed, though Quinn suspected it had less to do with trust and more to do with the fact that she had nowhere else to go. Her mother had passed away the previous winter, and without that tie, Omaha held nothing for her but danger. They had ridden out together that very night, pushing hard for Council Bluffs before Whitmore could solidify his claim. 8 days on the trail, stopping only when the horses needed rest, sleeping under the stars with Quinn maintaining a respectful distance, even as he found himself watching the firelight play across Ophelia's face, and wondering what it would be like to have someone like her in his life permanently. She was educated, which was unusual for a woman working as a clerk. Her father had been a lawyer before he died, and he had taught her to read legal documents and understand the intricacies of property law. Her mother had been a teacher, and between the two of them, they had given Ophelia an education that rivaled most men in the territory. Quinn was not an educated man in the formal sense, but he knew horses and land and the value of honest work. His father had built the ranch from nothing, and Quinn had inherited it when both his parents had died of fever 5 years ago. He had been 23 then, young and grieving, and determined to make the ranch thrive in their memory. Now, at 28, he had built it into one of the most productive horse operations in western Iowa, and he would be damned if he let Silas Whitmore steal it with forged papers. Judge Morrison finally restored order in the courtroom, and he fixed Quinn with a hard stare. "These are serious accusations. Do you understand that if you are lying, you will be charged with contempt and defamation?" "I understand completely," Quinn said, "and I stand by every word. Ophelia Owens has documentation that will prove Whitmore bribed officials to forge my signature and backdate the sale. She has the original documents that show I paid my property taxes in full before I left for Fort Laramie, and she has records of Whitmore's payments to the clerk who helped him falsify the papers." Whitmore had gone pale, but his lawyer was made of sterner stuff. "Your Honor, this woman is clearly being coerced by Mr. Xavier. She has every reason to lie to help him regain property that he legally sold." Ophelia spoke for the first time, and her voice rang clear and strong across the courtroom. "I am not being coerced by anyone. I am here because I saw corruption and fraud, and I chose to stand against it. I have documented evidence of 16 separate cases where properties were stolen through falsified documents, and Mr. Xavier's ranch is just one of them. If you allow this claim to stand, you are not just stealing from one man. You are endorsing a system that will destroy the rights of every honest landowner in this territory." The speech was bold, and Quinn felt a surge of admiration that mixed dangerously with the attraction he had been trying to ignore for the past 8 days. Ophelia was not just brave. She was brilliant, and watching her stand up to these powerful men made Quinn realize that he was falling for her in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude, and everything to do with the kind of bone-deep recognition of a partner who could stand beside him through anything. Judge Morrison's expression shifted, and Quinn thought he saw a flicker of something like shame cross the older man's face. Morrison was not corrupt by nature, but he had been influenced by Whitmore's money and position. Now, faced with concrete evidence and a witness willing to testify, he would have to choose which side of history he wanted to be on. "I will hear the evidence," Morrison said finally. Miss Owens approached the bench. The next 3 hours were tense as Ophelia methodically laid out the documentation she had brought. She had copies of the original tax payments Quinn had made, showing they were recorded before his departure for Fort Laramie. She had copies of the forged sale document with its backdated signature. Most damning of all, she had the ledger from the Omaha land office showing payments from Whitmore to a clerk named Robert Finch, along with notations in Finch's handwriting that referenced document alterations and signature matching. Whitmore's lawyer tried to discredit her, suggesting she had forged the documents herself or been paid by Quinn to create false evidence. But Ophelia remained calm under questioning, pointing out details that only someone who had actually worked in the land office would know, citing specific cases and dates that could be verified through other sources. By the time the sun was setting through the courthouse windows, Judge Morrison looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. He called a recess and summoned both lawyers to his chambers, along with Sheriff Tom Bradley, who had been sitting at the back of the courtroom looking increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. Quinn and Ophelia were left waiting in the courtroom, and when the other spectators had filtered out, Quinn finally turned to her. "You were incredible in there." Ophelia's shoulders sagged with exhaustion, and for the first time since they had arrived, she looked vulnerable. "I was terrified. I kept thinking they would find some way to discredit everything, and we would both end up in jail or worse. But you did it anyway." Quinn reached out and took her hand, and the touch sent warmth flooding through him. "You stood up there and faced them down like you were born to it." She looked down at their joined hands, and Quinn saw color rise in her cheeks. "I had to. What they did to you, what they have done to others, it is wrong. I could not live with myself if I stayed silent. You could have run. You could have taken your copies and disappeared somewhere they would never find you." "I thought about it," Ophelia admitted. "But then you showed up at my door, and you looked at me like I was someone who mattered, not just a clerk or a woman to be dismissed. You made me believe that maybe we could win." Quinn squeezed her hand gently. "We have not won yet. No, but we have a chance. That is more than I had yesterday." They sat together in the fading light, and Quinn found himself studying the lines of her face, the curve of her neck, the way her hair had started to come loose from its pins after the long day. She was beautiful in a quiet way that snuck up on a man, the kind of beauty that came from strength and intelligence rather than mere prettiness of features. "What will you do after this?" Quinn asked. "Assuming we win, I mean. Will you go back to Omaha?" Ophelia shook her head. "I cannot go back there. Too many people will know what I did, and even if Whitmore is prosecuted, his associates will still be there. I will need to start over somewhere new." Quinn's heart hammered in his chest, and he knew he was about to take a leap that could change everything. "You could stay here, in Council Bluffs, I mean, at the ranch." She looked at him sharply, her green eyes searching his face. "As what? Your housekeeper, as my wife, if you would have me." The words hung between them, and Quinn could not believe he had just proposed to a woman he had known for barely more than a week. But it felt right in a way that defied logic, and he pressed on before his courage failed. "I know it is fast, and I know we barely know each other. But Ophelia, these past 8 days on the trail, I have seen who you are. You are brave and smart and principled, and you make me want to be a better man. I am not proposing because I think you need rescuing or because I feel obligated. I am proposing because somewhere between Omaha and here, I fell in love with you, and I do not want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I had been too much of a coward to ask. Ophelia's eyes had gone wide, and for a moment, Quinn thought he had made a terrible mistake. Then her face softened and she smiled with a tenderness that made his breath catch. Quinn Xavier, you are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish, possibly both. She paused and Quinn's heart stopped. Yes, my answer is yes. He pulled her close then, propriety be damned, and kissed her in the empty courtroom with a passion that had been building for days. She kissed him back, her arms coming up around his neck, and Quinn felt like he had finally found the home he had been searching for without even knowing he was lost. They broke apart when they heard voices approaching, and Quinn straightened his vest while Ophelia hastily repinned her hair, both of them trying not to grin like fools. Judge Morrison returned with the lawyers and the sheriff, and his expression was grave. After reviewing the evidence presented by Miss Owens, I am ruling that the sale of the Xavier Ranch was procured through fraud. The deed is hereby voided, and ownership is returned to Quinn Xavier immediately. Morrison fixed Whitmore with a stern look. Mr. Whitmore, you are ordered to vacate the property within 24 hours. Additionally, I am referring this case to the federal marshal for prosecution. You will remain in Council Bluffs until this matter is fully investigated. Whitmore exploded with rage, threatening lawsuits and calling in favors, but Sheriff Bradley stepped forward and physically restrained him. That is enough. You will comply with the judge's order or you will spend the night in jail. Your choice. Defeated, Whitmore allowed himself to be escorted from the courthouse, his lawyer trailing behind and already making plans for appeals that everyone in the room knew would fail. Judge Morrison turned to Quinn and Ophelia. I apologize, Mr. Xavier. I should have investigated more thoroughly before allowing this case to proceed. I was influenced by Mr. Whitmore's reputation and resources, and I failed in my duty to ensure justice. I hope you can forgive an old man's mistake. Quinn wanted to be angry, but looking at Morrison's sincere remorse, he found he could not hold onto his resentment. Just make sure it does not happen again, Your Honor. There are others who have been hurt by Whitmore's schemes, and they deserve justice too. Morrison nodded. Miss Owens's documentation will help with that. She has given us enough to investigate every transaction Whitmore has made in the past 2 years. They left the courthouse as the sky was turning purple with twilight, and Quinn felt like he could breathe freely for the first time in weeks. His ranch was his again, and he had a future that looked brighter than anything he could have imagined when he had set out for Fort Laramie all those months ago. They rode out to the ranch together, with Quinn borrowing a gentle mare from the livery for Ophelia since his own horses were still stabled there. The 5-mile ride gave them time to talk about practical matters like where Ophelia would sleep until they could arrange a proper wedding, and what they would do about the damage Whitmore had likely done to the property in the months he had occupied it. The ranch was in worse shape than Quinn had feared. Whitmore had clearly been living there but had done no maintenance on the outbuildings or fences. Several of Quinn's breeding mares had been sold off, along with most of his equipment. The house itself was a mess, with expensive furnishings that Whitmore had brought in scattered among Quinn's father's simple furniture, creating a jarring mismatch of styles. Ophelia stood in the main room of the ranch house and slowly turned in a circle, taking it all in. It will take work to set this right. Are you having second thoughts? Quinn asked, suddenly worried that the reality of ranch life might be too much for a woman who had spent her adult years working in offices and living in town. Not at all, Ophelia said firmly. I grew up on a small farm in Ohio before my father became a lawyer. I know how to work, Quinn. I am not some delicate flower who will wilt at the first sign of difficulty." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "I know you are not. I just want you to be happy here. This life can be lonely and hard, especially for a woman used to having neighbors close by." Ophelia tilted her head back to look at him. "I will be with you. That is all the company I need." They spent the evening clearing out Whitmore's belongings and setting them on the porch for the sheriff to collect. Quinn made a simple dinner of beans and cornbread while Ophelia scrubbed the kitchen until it met her standards. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, and Quinn marveled at how natural it felt to have her in his space. That night, Quinn gave Ophelia his bedroom while he made a bedroll on the floor of the main room. It was the proper thing to do, even though every part of him wanted to climb those stairs and finish what they had started with that kiss in the courtroom. But he had promised himself he would do this right, and that meant waiting until they were properly married. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch at night and thinking about how much his life had changed. 3 months ago, he had been focused solely on building his horse breeding operation and making the ranch profitable. Now he was engaged to a woman who made his heart race, and his future seemed full of possibilities he had never considered. The next morning, Quinn woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. He stumbled into the kitchen to find Ophelia already dressed and cooking breakfast like she had been doing it in his kitchen for years. "You did not have to do this," Quinn said, accepting the cup of coffee she handed him gratefully. "I wanted to. Besides, we have a lot to do today. I thought we should start with a proper inventory of what is left and what needs to be replaced." They spent the morning walking the property together, and Quinn pointed out the various paddocks and buildings while Ophelia took notes in a small ledger she had found among Whitmore's abandoned belongings. The breeding barn had been neglected, but the structure was sound. The tack room had been ransacked, with most of Quinn's good saddles and bridles gone, likely sold by Whitmore to fund his lifestyle. Quinn's anger flared when they discovered that Whitmore had also sold off his best breeding stallion, a magnificent black Morgan named Thunder that Quinn had spent 3 years training. But Ophelia put a hand on his arm and reminded him that they had won the bigger battle, and horses could be replaced. "You are right," Quinn said, forcing himself to calm down. "I just hate that he took so much. My father spent his whole life building this place, and Whitmore nearly destroyed it in a few months." "But he did not succeed," Ophelia said softly. "The ranch is still here, and so are you. We will rebuild it together, and it will be even better than before." Her confidence was infectious, and Quinn found himself smiling despite his frustration. "When did you become such an optimist?" "When I met a cowboy who believed I was worth fighting for," Ophelia replied, standing on her toes to kiss his cheek. They were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, and Quinn tensed until he recognized his neighbor, Jack Fletcher, riding up with 2 of his ranch hands. Fletcher was a good man, one of the few in Council Bluffs who had stood by Quinn when Whitmore had taken over. "Heard you got your ranch back," Fletcher called out, dismounting with the ease of a man who had spent his life on horseback. "Thought you might need some help getting things back in order." Relief flooded through Quinn. "Jack, you have no idea how good it is to see you." Fletcher grinned and tipped his hat to Ophelia. "This the lady who helped you prove your case. Word around town is she made Whitmore look like a fool in front of the judge." "Ophelia Owens, meet Jack Fletcher," Quinn said. "Jack owns the ranch to the north. He and I have been neighbors for 5 years." Ophelia shook Fletcher's hand with the same confidence she had shown in the courtroom. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Fletcher." "Just Jack, madam, and the pleasure is mine. Any woman brave enough to stand up to Whitmore and his cronies is a friend of mine." Fletcher looked between them with raised eyebrows. "So what is the story here? Are you two married or courting or what?" Quinn slipped an arm around Ophelia's waist. "We are engaged. I proposed yesterday, and she was kind enough to accept." Fletcher let out a whoop and slapped Quinn on the back hard enough to make him stumble. "That is fantastic news. When is the wedding?" "We have not decided yet," Ophelia said. "There is so much to do here first." "Nonsense," Fletcher declared. "You should get married right away. My wife Emma will help with the arrangements. She loves any excuse for a celebration, and Lord knows this town could use some good news after all the drama with Whitmore." Quinn looked at Ophelia, and she nodded with a smile that made his heart soar. "All right, then. Let us say 3 days from now. That will give us time to clean up the ranch and send word to anyone who might want to attend." Fletcher and his ranch hands stayed through the afternoon, helping Quinn repair fences and move equipment back into place. Emma Fletcher arrived around noon with 2 other women from town, and they whisked Ophelia away to discuss wedding plans and dresses, leaving Quinn to work with the men. By the time the sun was setting, the ranch was starting to look like itself again. The paddocks were secure, the barn had been mucked out and restocked with fresh hay, and the house had been thoroughly cleaned of all traces of Whitmore's occupation. Quinn stood on the porch and looked out over his land, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction mixed with anticipation for what was to come. Ophelia found him there after the neighbors had left, and she leaned against the porch railing beside him. Emma Fletcher is a force of nature. She has already planned the entire wedding, including borrowing a dress from her sister and arranging for the ceremony to be held at the church in town. "Are you all right with that?" Quinn asked. "I know we are rushing this." "I am more than all right with it," Ophelia assured him. "I have no family left to invite, and starting our life together sooner rather than later feels right to me." Quinn pulled her close, and they stood together watching the stars come out over the prairie. "I want to make you happy, Ophelia. I want to give you a good life here." "You already make me happy," she said simply. "Everything else is just details." The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Word of the wedding spread through Council Bluffs, and to Quinn's surprise, most of the town seemed genuinely happy for them. Several people who had stayed silent during Whitmore's takeover came forward to apologize and offer their help, bringing gifts of food and household goods to stock the ranch. Sheriff Bradley stopped by to inform them that Whitmore had been formally charged with fraud and would be standing trial in the fall. Other victims of his land schemes had come forward after Ophelia's testimony, and it looked like Whitmore would be spending considerable time in prison. "You two did a good thing," Bradley said, accepting a cup of coffee from Ophelia. "Whitmore thought he was above the law and you proved him wrong. That takes courage." Ophelia blushed at the praise, but Quinn could see she was pleased. She had been working tirelessly to get the ranch house ready for their wedding guests, and the transformation was remarkable. The building that had felt violated by Whitmore's presence now felt warm and welcoming again, filled with wildflowers that Ophelia had picked from the prairie and curtains she had sewn from fabric Emma Fletcher had given her. On the morning of the wedding, Quinn put on his best suit, which still smelled faintly of the cedar chest where his mother had stored it years ago. He stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom and tried to tame his hair, which had a tendency to stick up in odd directions no matter how much water he used. Jack Fletcher arrived to act as his best man, and they rode into town together while Quinn tried to ignore the nervous butterflies in his stomach. "You are doing the right thing," Fletcher said as they approached the church. "I can see the way you look at her, Quinn. That is the way a man should look at his wife." The church was small but packed with people. Quinn was touched to see that despite everything that had happened, the community had turned out to support them. Judge Morrison was there, along with Sheriff Bradley and several other town officials. Quinn's ranch hands, the few who had stayed loyal during Whitmore's occupation, sat in the front row grinning like fools. Then the music started, and Ophelia appeared at the back of the church on Emma Fletcher's arm. She wore a simple ivory dress that Emma's sister had lent her, with her brown hair pinned up and decorated with prairie flowers. She was radiant, and Quinn felt his throat tighten with emotion as she walked toward him. The ceremony was performed by Reverend Thomas, an elderly man who had known Quinn since he was a child. His words about love and commitment took on special meaning given everything Quinn and Ophelia had been through together. And when it came time to exchange vows, Quinn's voice was rough with feeling. "I promise to stand by you through every challenge, to protect you and cherish you, and to build a life with you that honors the courage you showed in standing up for what was right. I love you, Ophelia, and I will love you until my last breath." Ophelia's eyes were bright with tears as she spoke her own vows. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to work beside you and support you, and to make our home a place of joy and peace. You saw worth in me when I felt worthless, Quinn, and you gave me hope when I had none. I love you, and I choose you today and every day for the rest of my life." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, and told Quinn he could kiss his bride, Quinn pulled Ophelia into his arms and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness he had been holding back for the past 2 weeks. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and Quinn could not stop smiling as he led his new wife back down the aisle. The reception was held at the Fletcher Ranch, with long tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed half the county. People danced to fiddle music and toasted the new couple, and Quinn felt a sense of belonging he had not experienced since his parents died. He had his land back, he had a wife he adored, and he had a community that had ultimately chosen to support him. As the sun began to set, Quinn and Ophelia slipped away from the celebration and rode back to their ranch. The house was quiet after the noise of the party, and they stood together in the main room, suddenly shy with each other now that they were truly alone as husband and wife. "I cannot believe this is real," Ophelia said softly. 3 weeks ago I was alone and frightened in Omaha, and now I am married to the most incredible man I have ever met." Quinn cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently. 3 weeks ago, I thought I had lost everything. Now I have everything that matters." He led her upstairs to the bedroom they would now share, and they made love with a tender passion that spoke of new beginnings and promises kept. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, and Quinn traced lazy patterns on Ophelia's bare shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice drowsy and content. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, and I am thinking about the future. What we are going to build here together." Ophelia propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Tell me what you see." "I see us rebuilding the breeding program, maybe specializing in Morgans since I lost Thunder. I see us expanding the ranch buildings and taking on more hands as we grow. I see children eventually, learning to ride before they can walk and running wild over the prairie the way I did when I was young." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "Is that what you want too?" "It sounds perfect," Ophelia said, leaning down to kiss him. "Although I might want to add a good library to your list. I plan to teach our children to read and write, and they will need books." Quinn laughed and pulled her back down against his chest. "A library it is. Anything else? A vegetable garden, and maybe some chickens. I want to make this place truly self-sufficient." They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming about the future, and when Quinn finally drifted off to sleep with his wife in his arms, he felt at peace in a way he never had before. The summer of 1876 passed quickly, as Quinn and Ophelia worked to restore the ranch to its former glory. True to his word, Quinn focused on rebuilding his Morgan breeding program, purchasing 3 quality mares and a young stallion from a breeder in Illinois. Ophelia threw herself into learning the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous records of expenses and income that helped Quinn make better decisions about where to invest their limited resources. She also planted the garden she had wanted, and by August, they were eating fresh vegetables with every meal. The chickens came next, a dozen Rhode Island Reds that provided eggs and endless entertainment as they scratched around the yard. In September, Jack Fletcher helped Quinn round up wild horses from the open prairie, and they spent weeks training the animals to be sold to farmers and ranchers throughout the region. Ophelia proved to have a natural way with horses, and Quinn loved watching her work with the younger animals, her voice soothing and her hands firm but gentle. The trial of Silas Whitmore took place in October, and both Quinn and Ophelia testified. Whitmore was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 10 years in the federal prison in Leavenworth, Kansas. It was a satisfying conclusion to the ordeal, though Quinn knew the man's victims would carry the scars of his crimes for years to come. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in mid-November. Quinn and Ophelia settled into the rhythms of married life, and Quinn discovered that having a partner to share the long winter evenings made all the difference. They read together by the fireplace, with Ophelia working her way through the collection of books that had belonged to Quinn's mother, while Quinn mended tack and equipment. They also talked about everything under the sun. Ophelia told him stories about growing up in Ohio, about her father's law practice and her mother's classroom. Quinn shared memories of his parents and the early days of the ranch, when everything had been a struggle and success was never guaranteed. In January of 1877, Ophelia missed her monthly courses, and by February they were certain she was pregnant. Quinn was overjoyed, though Ophelia seemed more nervous about the prospect of becoming a mother. "What if I am not good at it?" she asked one night as they lay in bed with her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "You will be wonderful," Quinn assured her. "You are smart and patient and loving. Our child will be lucky to have you as a mother." "Our children," Ophelia corrected with a small smile. "Plural. I do not want our first to be lonely the way I was growing up." Quinn kissed her forehead. "As many as you want, love. We will fill this house with laughter and noise." Emma Fletcher became Ophelia's closest friend during the pregnancy, visiting regularly to check on her and share advice from her own experiences with childbearing. Emma had 4 children of her own, ranging in age from 3 to 12, and her practical wisdom helped calm many of Ophelia's fears. Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. The Morgan mares Quinn had purchased delivered 3 healthy foals, and the sight of the gangly, legged babies racing around the paddock brought joy to everyone who saw them. Ophelia spent hours watching them from the porch, one hand resting on her growing belly as if sharing the sight with their unborn child. Quinn hired 2 new ranch hands in April, young men from town who were eager to learn the horse business. With their help, he was able to expand the operation and take on more training contracts. Money was still tight, but they were making steady progress toward financial stability. In July, Ophelia went into labor during a thunderstorm that raged across the prairie with biblical fury. Emma Fletcher arrived to help with the delivery, bringing her older daughter Martha to assist. Quinn was banished to the main room downstairs, where he paced and worried and jumped at every sound from above. The labor lasted 14 hours, and by the time Emma finally called him upstairs, Quinn was half mad with fear. But his terror melted away the moment he saw Ophelia propped up in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a squalling red-faced infant. "It is a boy," she said softly. "We have a son, Quinn." Quinn approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at the tiny creature in his wife's arms. The baby had stopped crying and was blinking up at them with unfocused eyes, one small fist waving in the air. "He is perfect," Quinn whispered, reaching out to touch the downy hair on his son's head. "You did it, Ophelia. You are amazing." She laughed tiredly. "We did it together. Would you like to hold him?" Quinn took his son carefully, cradling the warm weight against his chest, and felt something shift fundamentally in his heart. This was what life was about, he realized. Not just land or horses or proving yourself against those who would tear you down. It was about this, creating a family and a future and passing on something good to the next generation. "What should we name him?" Ophelia asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never settled on anything definite. Now, holding his son and looking at his wife, Quinn knew exactly what felt right. "Samuel James Xavier," he said. "Samuel after my father, James after yours, if that is all right with you." Tears spilled down Ophelia's cheeks and she nodded. "It is perfect." Samuel proved to be a healthy, happy baby who disrupted their sleep, but filled their lives with wonder. Quinn discovered that he loved fatherhood, even the exhausting parts. He would walk the floor at night with his son when Ophelia needed rest, singing the old cowboy songs his father had taught him, and making promises about all the things they would do together when Samuel was old enough. Ophelia blossomed into motherhood, though she was adamant about maintaining her role in running the ranch. By the time Samuel was 2 months old, she was back at her desk keeping the books, with the baby sleeping in a cradle beside her. When Quinn protested that she should rest more, she fixed him with a stern look and reminded him that she was perfectly capable of managing both motherhood and their business affairs. "I am not some fragile thing that needs to be wrapped in cotton," she said. "I married you to be your partner, Quinn, not to be locked away from the work I love." He raised his hands in surrender, grinning. "You are absolutely right. I apologize for suggesting otherwise." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch thrived under their combined management, and by 1880, Quinn's Morgan breeding program had become well known throughout Iowa and the surrounding territories. He sold horses to the Army, to wealthy ranchers, and to families who wanted reliable animals for farming and transportation. In the spring of 1879, Ophelia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose after Ophelia's mother. Unlike her brother, who had been an easy baby, Margaret was colicky and fussy, keeping them both up for months until she finally grew out of it. But even during the difficult nights, Quinn would look at his wife rocking their screaming daughter and feel grateful for the family they had created. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses as much as Quinn did. By the age of 4, he was already riding on his own and showing an intuitive understanding of horse behavior that made Quinn's chest swell with pride. Margaret was her mother's daughter, curious and intelligent, asking endless questions about everything she saw. In 1882, their third child arrived, another boy they named Thomas after Reverend Thomas, who had married them and remained a close friend. Thomas was a sunny-natured baby who smiled at everyone and rarely cried, and having an easy third child felt like a gift after Margaret's difficult infancy. The ranch continued to prosper through the early 1880s. Quinn expanded their land holdings, purchasing an adjacent property when the owner decided to move back east. This gave them more grazing land and allowed Quinn to increase his breeding stock. Ophelia's careful management of their finances meant they always had a cushion for difficult times, and they were able to weather the occasional bad year without panic. In the autumn of 1883, Quinn received a letter from a horse breeder in Montana Territory who wanted to purchase 6 of his trained Morgans. The price offered was generous enough that Quinn decided to make the delivery personally, both for the adventure and to establish connections in the Northern Territories. Ophelia was 7 months pregnant with their 4th child and insisted she would be fine managing the ranch while he was gone. Emma Fletcher promised to check on her daily, and their ranch hands were experienced enough to handle the day-to-day operations. "I will only be gone 3 weeks," Quinn said as he prepared to leave with the string of horses. 4 at most if the weather turns. "We will be fine," Ophelia assured him, standing on the porch with Thomas on her hip while Samuel and Margaret clung to her skirts. "Just come home safely." Quinn kissed her goodbye, struck as always by how much he loved this woman who had appeared in his life when he needed her most. "I love you, Ophelia Xavier. I will be back before you know it." The journey to Montana was uneventful but longer than anticipated due to early snow in the mountains. By the time Quinn completed the delivery and started the return journey, he had been gone for nearly 5 weeks. He pushed hard to make up time, worried about Ophelia and the baby that would be arriving soon. He rode into the ranch just after dawn on a cold November morning to find Emma Fletcher's horse tied outside and smoke rising from the chimney. His heart leaped into his throat as he dismounted and ran for the house, terrified that something had gone wrong. But he opened the door to find Ophelia sitting in the rocking chair by the fire, nursing a tiny infant while Emma made breakfast and the older children ate at the table. Everyone looked healthy and happy, and the relief that flooded through Quinn nearly brought him to his knees. "You are home," Samuel shouted, leaping from his chair to throw himself at Quinn. Quinn caught his son and hugged him tight, but his eyes were locked on Ophelia. She smiled at him, radiant and exhausted and more beautiful than ever. "You have a daughter," she said. "She arrived 5 days ago. We named her Julia Claire." Quinn crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the rocking chair, looking down at the newest addition to their family. Julia was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and her eyes closed in contentment as she nursed. "I am sorry I was not here," Quinn said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are here now," Ophelia replied. "That is what matters." Emma Fletcher tactfully gathered the older children and took them outside to do chores, giving Quinn and Ophelia a moment of privacy. Quinn sat on the floor beside his wife's chair and rested his head against her knee, overwhelmed with gratitude for everything he had. "I missed you so much," he said. "Every mile away from you felt wrong." "I missed you too," Ophelia said, stroking his hair with her free hand. "But I knew you would come back. You always come back." Julia finished nursing and let out a small burp, and Ophelia handed her to Quinn with a smile. He held his youngest daughter carefully, marveling at how tiny she was compared to how he remembered the others. "4 children," he said wonderingly. "We have 4 children, Ophelia. And a thriving ranch and a good life and each other," she added. "We have built something amazing here, Quinn. Something worth being proud of." He looked up at his wife, this woman who had risked everything to help a stranger and ended up becoming the center of his world. "I love you. I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I can express." "I know," Ophelia said softly. "I see it every day in the way you look at me, in the way you provide for our family, in the way you work yourself to exhaustion to give us a good life. I love you too, Quinn Xavier. I chose you that day in Omaha, and I would choose you again every single day." The years continued to pass in a blur of hard work and family moments. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Samuel became Quinn's shadow, learning everything about horse breeding and training. Margaret showed a talent for figures and began helping her mother with the ranch accounts by the age of 10. Thomas was the peacemaker, always trying to smooth over conflicts between his siblings. And Julia, the baby, proved to be a daredevil who gave them all heart attacks with her fearless antics. By 1890, the Xavier Ranch was one of the most successful horse operations in Iowa. Quinn had contracts with multiple Army forts and had even sold horses to buyers as far away as Texas and Oregon. The original ranch house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, and they had built a beautiful barn that was the envy of their neighbors. Ophelia had achieved her dream of a library, and one entire room of the house was now lined with bookshelves filled with volumes on every subject imaginable. She taught the children their letters and numbers, and by the time they were old enough for the town school, they were already reading at advanced levels. On a warm evening in June of 1891, Quinn and Ophelia sat on the porch swing watching the sun set over the prairie. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Samuel was 16 now, tall and capable, practicing his roping skills on a fence post. Margaret, at 12, was reading a book in the grass while keeping one eye on her younger siblings. Thomas and Julia were engaged in some elaborate game that involved running and shrieking. "Do you ever think about that day in Omaha?" Ophelia asked, leaning against Quinn's shoulder. "When you showed up at my door and asked me to come with you." "All the time," Quinn admitted. "It was the best decision I ever made." "It was terrifying," Ophelia said with a laugh. "I thought you might be insane, asking me to ride halfway across Nebraska with a man I had just met." "I was a little insane," Quinn agreed. "Insane with fear that I was going to lose everything, and insane with hope that maybe you could help me save it." "We saved each other," Ophelia said, reaching for his hand. "I was so lost after my mother died. I had no purpose, no future. You gave me both." Quinn squeezed her hand gently. "You gave me a family, a real home, not just a place to live. You gave me love and partnership and children who make me proud every single day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play and feeling the contentment that came from a life well lived. The struggles of those early years seemed distant now, though the lessons they had learned remained sharp. "I wish I could go back and tell that frightened clerk in Omaha that everything was going to be all right," Ophelia said. "That taking the risk of trusting you would lead to all of this." "She would not have believed you," Quinn replied with a smile. "She would have thought it was too good to be true." "It does feel too good to be true sometimes," Ophelia admitted. "Like I am going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." Quinn pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. "It is real. We are real. And we are going to keep building this life together for as many years as we are blessed to have." In 1895, Samuel married a young woman named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the far side of the property. Samuel took over more and more of the day-to-day horse operations, allowing Quinn to step back slightly and spend more time with his younger children. Margaret surprised them all by announcing at 16 that she wanted to go to college in Chicago to study accounting. Quinn had initially balked at the idea of his daughter moving so far away, but Ophelia had given him a stern look and reminded him that they had always encouraged their children to pursue their dreams. "She is brilliant, Quinn," Ophelia had said, "and she deserves the chance to use her talents. We cannot hold her back just because we will miss her." So, in the fall of 1896, they took Margaret to Chicago and enrolled her in a business college for women. Saying goodbye at the train station was one of the hardest things Quinn had ever done, but seeing the excitement and determination in his daughter's eyes made it bearable. Thomas, at 14, showed more interest in ranching than horses, and he spent hours discussing cattle operations with Jack Fletcher's sons. Julia, at 12, was still figuring out what she wanted, but she had her mother's courage and intelligence, and Quinn knew she would find her path. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. On New Year's Eve of 1899, the Xavier family gathered with their friends and neighbors at the church in Council Bluffs to mark the turning of the century. Quinn stood with his arm around Ophelia, their children and grandchildren around them, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Ophelia asked, as she so often did. "I am thinking about how far we have come," Quinn replied. From that first day in the courthouse, when we did not know if we would win or lose, to this moment with our family around us and a new century ahead. "It has been quite a journey," Ophelia agreed. As the church bells rang out midnight and the year 1900 began, Quinn kissed his wife with the same passion he had felt on their wedding day nearly 24 years earlier. Some things, he reflected, only got better with time. The early years of the new century brought changes, as all years do. Jack Fletcher passed away in 1902, and Quinn served as a pallbearer for the man who had been his friend and neighbor for nearly 30 years. Emma Fletcher sold the ranch to one of her sons and moved into town, though she remained a frequent visitor to the Xavier place. Margaret graduated from college in 1903 and took a position with a large accounting firm in Chicago. She visited home twice a year, always bringing stories of city life that fascinated and appalled her rural family in equal measure. In 1905, she married a fellow accountant, and they settled in Chicago permanently. Thomas married in 1904 and, with Quinn's help, purchased a cattle ranch 20 miles south. He and his wife Sarah had 3 children in quick succession, and the extended Xavier family gathered regularly for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Julia, true to her independent nature, shocked everyone by announcing in 1906 that she was moving to Denver to work as a photographer. She had developed a passion for the new art form and had talent enough that a Denver studio had offered her an apprenticeship. Ophelia supported her daughter's choice, though Quinn struggled with letting his youngest fly so far from the nest. "She has your courage," Quinn told Ophelia the night after they put Julia on the train. "She is not afraid to go after what she wants." "She has your stubbornness too," Ophelia replied with a smile, "which means she will succeed no matter what obstacles she faces." In 1908, Samuel and Catherine gave Quinn and Ophelia their 5th grandchild, and the Xavier Ranch continued to thrive under the partnership between father and son. Quinn, at 60 years old, had finally accepted that he was entering the autumn of his life, but he did not mind. He had accomplished more than he ever dreamed possible, and he had done it with the woman he loved at his side. On a golden afternoon in October of 1910, Quinn and Ophelia rode out to the high meadow at the edge of their property. It was something they tried to do regularly, stealing a few hours away from the bustle of the ranch to be alone together. They spread a blanket on the grass and lay side by side, watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. Ophelia's hair was threaded with silver now, and Quinn's face was lined with decades of sun and wind, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had met in Omaha 34 years earlier. "You have any regrets?" Ophelia asked. Quinn thought about it seriously before answering. "I regret the months I lost when Whitmore stole the ranch. I regret every moment I have been away from you, but overall, no, I have no real regrets. My life has been everything I could have hoped for and more." "Mine too," Ophelia said softly. "I think about that day you appeared at my door in Omaha, and I am so grateful I said yes. So grateful I took that leap of faith." "I am the one who should be grateful," Quinn insisted. "You saved my ranch, Ophelia. You saved my life, and you gave me a family and a purpose beyond just surviving." She rolled onto her side to face him, and Quinn did the same. They lay there looking at each other, hands clasped between them, and the love that passed between them felt as strong and true as it had on their wedding day. "Promise me something," Ophelia said. "Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, you will always remember that our love was worth fighting for, that what we built here together matters." Quinn's throat tightened with emotion. "I promise, and you have to promise me the same thing." "I promise," Ophelia whispered. They kissed there in the meadow, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that would echo through generations. The ranch would endure, pass down to Samuel and eventually to his children. The values of courage and integrity that Quinn and Ophelia had demonstrated would shape their family for years to come. And the love story that had begun with forged documents and a desperate ride across Nebraska would become family legend, told and retold until everyone knew the tale of the cowboy who lost his land and the brave woman who helped him reclaim it. As the sun began to set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, Quinn and Ophelia rode back to the ranch hand in hand. The house came into view, smoke rising from the chimney where Catherine was making dinner. They could see their grandchildren playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Home," Ophelia said with satisfaction. "Home," Quinn agreed. They dismounted and turned the horses over to one of the ranch hands, then walked together to the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. As they settled into the swing, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long practice, Quinn felt complete in a way that had nothing to do with land or success or anything material. He had his wife, his family, and his land. He had built something that would last beyond his lifetime, and he had done it with honor and integrity intact. Silas Whitmore had tried to steal his future, but instead, he had inadvertently set in motion events that led Quinn to the greatest treasure of his life. As the stars began to appear overhead, Quinn and Ophelia sat together in the twilight, two souls who had found each other in the midst of chaos and built something beautiful from the ashes of what might have been. Their love had weathered every storm, overcome every obstacle, and emerged stronger for the trials they had faced together. And there, on a ranch in Iowa where the prairie grass whispered its eternal song and the horses moved like shadows in the gathering dark, Quinn Xavier held his wife close and knew with absolute certainty that every single moment of their journey together had been worth it. The years continued their inevitable march, bringing joy and sorrow in equal measure as all years do. In 1915, the world around them changed as news of war in Europe reached even quiet Council Bluffs. Quinn and Ophelia watched with concern as young men from town enlisted, though their own sons were past the age for service and their grandsons still too young. Quinn retired fully from active ranch management in 1916, turning everything over to Samuel, while he and Ophelia focused on enjoying their grandchildren and each other. They traveled for the first time in their lives, taking the train to Chicago to visit Margaret and her family, then west to Denver to see Julia, who had become a successful photographer with her own studio. In the spring of 1918, Quinn and Ophelia celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary with a party that filled the ranch house to bursting with children, grandchildren, friends, and neighbors. Looking around at all the faces of people who had been touched by their love story, Quinn felt humbled and blessed. Emma Fletcher, now in her 80s and frail, pulled Ophelia aside during the party. "You two did it right," she said, her voice wavering with age. "So many couples start strong and fade, but you and Quinn just got stronger. That is rare, Ophelia. Treasure it." "I do, Emma. Every single day." That night, after all the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Quinn and Ophelia climbed the stairs to their bedroom the way they had countless times before. They prepared for bed in comfortable silence, moving around each other with the practiced choreography of decades of marriage. As they settled under the quilts that Ophelia had sewn years earlier, Quinn pulled her close and kissed her temple. 42 years, he marveled. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday we were standing in that courtroom, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. "Both are true," Ophelia said, resting her head on his chest where she could hear his heartbeat steady and strong. "Time is strange that way, but I would not trade a single moment of it, Quinn, not even the hard parts." "The hard parts made us who we are," Quinn agreed. "They taught us that we could face anything as long as we faced it together." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, and in the morning they woke to sunshine streaming through the windows and the sounds of the ranch coming to life outside. Another day, another blessing, another chance to love each other well. In 1920, as the nation celebrated the end of the Great War and the beginning of a new decade, Quinn and Ophelia marked their 70s with quiet satisfaction. Their hair was white now, their steps slower, their bodies bearing the marks of a lifetime of hard work. But their love remained as vibrant as ever, a steady flame that had never diminished. On a summer evening much like the one where this story began, they sat on their porch swing watching the sun set over the land they had fought so hard to keep. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to their determination and partnership. "I have been thinking," Ophelia said suddenly. "About what?" "About that day Silas Whitmore tried to steal this place from you, about how angry and scared and desperate we both were." Quinn nodded slowly. "I think about it sometimes too. What would have happened if you had not been brave enough to stand with me? Where would I be now?" "Where would I be?" Ophelia countered. "Probably still alone, still running from one place to another trying to find purpose. You gave me a reason to be brave, Quinn. You made me believe I was worth something." "You always were," Quinn said firmly. "I just helped you see it." Ophelia smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "We helped each other see it. That is what love does, I think. It shows us the best versions of ourselves and gives us the courage to become those people." They sat in silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, and the first stars began to appear. The evening was perfect, the air soft and warm, carrying the scent of prairie grass and horses and home. "Quinn," Ophelia's voice was soft. "Yes, love, thank you for choosing me, for seeing something in a frightened clerk that was worth fighting for giving me this life." Quinn turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Thank you for saying yes when any sensible woman would have said no. Thank you for standing up in that courtroom when you could have walked away. Thank you for every day of the past 44 years. They kissed then, gently and tenderly, two people who had weathered every storm life could throw at them and emerged victorious not because they were special or chosen, but because they had chosen each other and never wavered from that choice. As darkness fell completely and the stars blazed overhead in their millions, Quinn and Ophelia Xavier sat together on the porch of the ranch they had saved, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and their love. Their children were grown and successful, their grandchildren healthy and happy, their legacy secure, but more than any of that, they had each other. And in the end, That was the greatest treasure of all. They had taken a tragedy and transformed it into triumph, had turned loss into love, and had built something that would endure long after they were gone. The cowboy had come back with proof and a bride who could testify, and together they had won not just the battle for land, but the greater war for a life well lived and a love that would echo through eternity. And as the moon rose over the Iowa prairie and cast silver light across the land that had been the stage for their greatest battles and their deepest joys, Quinn and Ophelia Xavier held each other close and knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them the same way they had faced everything else in their remarkable journey together, side by side, heart to heart, now and forever.